today. And before I get to what we're going to talk about, I just want to mention that over the years I've witnessed dozens of staff walked out of or out of the prisons in the last 29 years. I've been an investigator on some of them. Some of them were my friends. Some I just worked with, and a couple of them I even saw what was going on with the manipulation and went to them and expressed it to them, but for whatever reason it was ignored. So over the years, it's really been something I've tried to teach. If you'll go back to episode 6, I did and I can't stop them. Some of them were very good friends of mine, and there was nothing I could do about it. And if you've been keeping up on the news, you know that right now that Vicki White, who is assistant superintendent in an Alabama detention center, apparently just a great officer. 4 years in a row she got Officer of the Year. A great employee, no problems. And then one day she walked out a couple of weeks ago with an inmate and said she was taking him downtown for a mental health evaluation, and come to find out there was no mental health evaluation. She'd sold her house and taken off across the country, and the federal marshals are still looking for them at this time. So that's kind of what brought this back. Before I introduce our guest, I want to read a section to introduce her from her own website. And so I'll just start here. If you search this site looking for a broken woman with a felony, you'll find me. If you read this story hoping for answers, you'll find a woman living with conviction. With wisdom, you'll find both. In my story, perhaps we'll find each other. It was time to take stock. I felt as disposable as the 670,000 dogs put down in the United States every year, so I started a prison dog program called Safe Harbor. Through Safe Harbor, I helped hardened inmates develop compassion and responsibility. I offered well-adjusted dogs to local families. Tall, confident, and cool, John Manard, a convicted murderer, noticed me. Socially engineered safeguards designed to prevent indiscretions only fanned the flames. What began as fun and games under the nose of authority turned criminal when I smuggled him out of a Lansing prison in a dog crate. A police helicopter illuminated our fugitive run. Like dogs, heavily armed officers bolted us into a tree at 100 miles an hour. Convicted, I went to prison where, shockingly, I felt no longer invisible. With my story of ruin, I discovered who I needed to be. I found freedom behind bars. And I'm going to introduce Toby Dorr. She has taken that start and has, well, we'll just talk to her and she can tell you where she's at today. But welcome, Toby.
Thank you so much, Mike.
I'm so excited to have you here. A lot of the things that we do on the Prison Officer Podcast are to help the officers, to train the officers, to let them know, the little tricks and trades to getting through a tough job, which corrections is. And so today I really want to reach out to you and hear your story and see if there's anything that you learned that maybe we could put out there for the officers to learn from. So tell me a little bit about you and how you grew up and stuff.
Okay, so I was the oldest of 7 children, and the day before my 5th birthday, my 5th sibling was born. So my parents had 5 children in one day less than 5 years. And when I was 5 and a half, my dad was burned in an accident in our backyard, and he was gone to the hospital for 6 months. And during that time, I kind of stepped up and left being a 5-year-old little girl and became a second mother to my younger brothers and sisters. And I changed diapers and fixed them sandwiches for lunch and, tried to help out however I could. And I've since learned,
of course,
that I suffered pretty strong PTSD at that time, but I never addressed it and I never paid any attention to it. But what happened is that I kind of threw myself into this prison of duty and perfectionist and taking responsibility that wasn't mine to take. And that kind of set everything up for a perfect storm of a of a meltdown. And then I got married. I married the only boy I ever dated, and we had 2 sons. We also had a daughter, and our daughter died at birth. And then we had 2 sons, and I raised them. And I had never dated anyone besides the man I married, and I didn't know what a relationship should look like. Right. And as our marriage grew, I was married for 28 years at the time of the escape, but my marriage was just kind of hollow and dead, and I didn't know how to get out of it. And, and then my dad, so let me back up a little bit. In 2004, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I had thyroid cancer and had to have my thyroid removed. And that kind of brought me to a crossroads in my life where I realized, not all of it, we don't have an unlimited amount of time here. And, right. That could have been my wake-up call. That could have been my ticket out. But it wasn't. And I realized, I was running out of time. I needed to do something that made a difference in this world, or else I would have just wasted my time here. And so while I was recovering, I watched this program on TV called Cell Dogs, where they had a dog program, and they brought dogs in and these inmates trained them. Mm-hmm. I'd always been active in a volunteer in dog rescue, and I was familiar with that. And I worked at a vet clinic, so I was really involved in dog training and dog rescue and dogs medical care. And I decided, well, that's what I want to do. I want to have a cell dog program. And my husband told me, well, that's just TV. They don't do that in real life. And so I decided, well, the least I could do is just start a dog rescue program and take some dogs from the shelter and train them and, try to find homes for them. And so I made that decision to start this dog rescue group called Safe Harbor. And 2 days after I, filled out the paperwork to have a rescue group, a representative from the warden's office right up the highway. So I said I would love to. That's really what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to go about doing it. And he said, well, can you come in on Wednesday and make a presentation to the warden and the executive team about what you'd like to do with the prison dog program? So that was 2 days later. And I said, sure. So I went in and I gave a presentation, and then they approved it. And they said, can you bring some dogs in on Friday? So I had to scramble around and go find some dogs that needed homes. And I took 7 dogs into the prison that Friday. So within 5 days, I'd been asked to start a prison dog program. I'd pitched one to the executive team. I was approved, and then I brought in dogs. And wow. So we just kind of built the program as we went. And in the 18 months that I ran the program, I rescued 1,000 dogs.
Oh, wow.
And brought them into the prison. I mean, it was the biggest prison dog program in the country. Mm-hmm. I had 100 dog handlers, and I had 70 to 80 dogs in the prison at any given time.
Wow.
We had dogs in maximum custody, minimum custody, and medium custody. And there were some dogs that weren't adoptable because they had, terrible separation anxiety. So we ended up putting those dogs in the mental health unit. And they just lived there with the inmates, and that kept everybody calm. Right. So the program really took off. And about a year into the program, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 bladder cancer. And it was just devastating. I'd already, right. As a 5-year-old, I'd believed I'd watched him die once. And, now he was dying again. And I think that was, the beginnings of setting me up for, a huge break. And at about the same time, John Manard, who was one of my dog handlers, noticed that something was off with me. And he said, Toby, what's going on with you? You seem so down, what's going on? Right. And I told him my dad was dying of cancer. And he was the only one who ever asked me, what was going on in my life. Even my husband kind of dismissed how I was feeling about my dad's cancer. So, it was just such a breath of fresh air to have someone notice that I needed help, that I was struggling.
So let me ask you a question. Were you given any training about what you to expect when you went to work in a prison, inmate manipulation, the things to stay away from?
Yes. So I went through the volunteer training when I first started. And if I remember right, it was like 2 or 3 hours of training. But my role as a volunteer was so different from the standard role of a volunteer. So like people who come in and they might do a Bible study class or a writing class or a typing class, they come in, and at least in the prison that I was working in or volunteering in, there's a set of rooms at the front of the prison that are not out in the yard where everybody, congregates. And so if you have a class, you come into that area and there's an officer in the room, and you come in for an hour once a week and you do your class, and there's an officer in the room. So that's the normal volunteer. But what my role ended up being as a volunteer, I had dogs in every custody unit of the prison. So I went anywhere I wanted. I never had an officer escort ever. And I just would come in and I'd go, I'm going over to M unit to check on their dogs. And they go, okay. And I would just walk around inside the prison for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 hours and just check on different dogs. And I don't think that kind of interaction is what I was trained for.
Okay. The reason I ask that is because him coming and asking you very specifically and having that conversation about something personal, especially something emotionally personal to you, is always one of the biggest clues that this has started. And that's why I wondered, were there any flags that came up at that time, or did you just feel like, wow, thank you for paying attention to me?
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt. No flag.
Okay.
No flag at all. I just felt like, and I kind of had that relationship with a lot of my dog handlers where we would just, when I came in and we'd be going through dog training exercises, or I'd be checking their dog that needed some medical care, we would just have conversations about, their sons or their wives or, whatever. It didn't seem out of the ordinary.
And nobody,
in my case,
nobody told you that was not the way you should be handling that.
That's correct.
Okay. That's just my question, because I do this training with staff, and I try to tell them as much as possible what those clues are. And, we don't keep pictures of our family on our desk at work. We don't.
Right. And that makes perfect sense.
Right. Because it gives them an in.
Right.
And once they get that in, all humans are emotional. And that's
exactly
what they're looking for. That's what they're looking for. But go ahead.
I feel, at least this is my assumption, and then I was on the other side of it as an inmate too. But, as human beings, and you just said it, we're emotional characters, but we crave connections with other people. And when you're in prison, if you don't have visits, if you don't have someone coming to visit you, you don't have any kind of a connection with anybody. And it just creates this craving, I think, that just rules everything. And I thought that was really the beauty of my prison dog program, too, was that I could put dogs into these men's cells. Here comes my cat. I could put dogs into these men's cells. One of the beauties of the prison dog program, and I noticed it right away, is I could bring a dog into the prison and give them to an inmate. And my dogs lived with their inmates in their cells. They slept in their beds with them. And it overnight changed the whole atmosphere of the prison.
It does.
Because now there was something that these men could love and could talk to and confide in. And we set up the program so that even if people weren't a dog handler, they could come up in the yard and pet a dog. There wasn't any rule that you can't touch a dog if you're not a dog handler. And the warden was so thrilled with the program because overnight it just changed the whole atmosphere of the prison. And so, I think the same thing happens. And I noticed it when I was an inmate too. But if you don't have someone on the outside who comes to visit you, or who writes to you, or who gives you a lifeline to the world, then people become desperate for some kind of connection, and it's just so unhealthy.
Absolutely. And I don't want you to think that I believe in those dog programs. I've worked in, there's been 3 of them where I've worked, and they do make a difference. Inmates who might otherwise be violent and have nothing to lose, all of a sudden have a lot to lose because they lose that dog and the chance they get to care for it. So
that's right.
I watched it in the mental health unit too, and it works very well. So when I say that, I don't want you to think I don't believe in the dog programs, because they do work.
So John Manard, in his particular case, he had not had a visit for 7 years. So he, and John Manard was really intelligent. He stood out from the rest of the inmates. He, most of the inmates, when I'd bring him a dog and I'd tell them, I want you to do this, this, and this with the dog, they'd just say, okay. And John Manard would say, well, why do you want me to do that? Don't you think maybe if I did this, it would work better? And I'd say, no, that won't work because of this. And he'd go, oh, that makes sense. Okay, well, I'll do it that way. So the relationship that I had with him was a little different from the very beginning. He just was more interactive, I suppose, more conversational.
Right.
So
Okay.
that just kind of was the way it was.
So
and I actually noticed, even with the other officers in the prison, they kind of treated him a little bit different too. It just, I don't know, it was just kind of odd. He kind of was like someone that, like if there was a trouble in the prison and the officers would talk to John and then John could make something happen and the activity would stop. It was just, he just seemed to have a little bit of authority somehow.
Yeah, and that happens with inmates that have, a personality, and their people are drawn to them. And you're right, I have seen that where officers utilize those inmates to calm down the housing unit or to get something done. But that also is a step down the road of getting manipulated, because once you give them that power, that authority, they're going to use it. And I'm not saying that everybody's bad or everybody's good, but I am saying that humans put inside a prison have to do things that normal people don't to get what they want.
That's true.
And
That's true.
What he might not do on the street, he will do in prison in order to get whatever it is. Sometimes it's nothing more. I've had inmates get in a lot of trouble just to get a cheeseburger brought in. Sometimes it's the little stuff. But yeah, giving him that authority. So that shows you're not the only one who was letting him have kind of a lead there and control stuff. So, So you and him, so you make this connection because he reaches out to you and has some empathy for you, and
that's right.
You're needing that at the time.
That's right. And so that was in October, and the escape happened in February. So there was also an incident in the prison in that same month of October where one of my dog handlers kind of accosted me, and I thought he was going to hit me. He was so angry, and he had his fists up, and I looked around the yard, and there was no officer in the yard. I couldn't find anybody to help me. And then John Manard comes strolling across the yard and kind of diffuses the whole situation. And so then when I went into the prison from that point on, I always made sure that John Manard was there to escort me around so I didn't get into any kind of trouble. So here's where I'm going to go with this. And I don't know if you were taught this. This is something I teach and have talked about. But inmates will often stage things to make an officer feel like they're in danger. And I've had it happen to me when I was a young rookie. And they send the biggest guy, the meanest guy to come down there and stand over you. And then some other inmate comes up and goes, hey, you leave him alone. He's just a rookie. You don't need to be doing this. Interesting.
And now you've got this friend, this automatic connection because somebody helped you. So I'm not saying that is what happened, but that is a tactic that they use in manipulation, is to play the protector, so to speak. So that's very interesting that you said that.
Yeah, so that did happen. And then, as the weeks progressed, we spent more time talking because he was escorting me around when I was inside the prison so
Sure.
that nobody else would accost me. And I just got to know him, and things just progressed. And at first I thought, well, I control this. I have all the cards because he's in prison and I can walk away. So a little flirtation isn't going to hurt anything.
Right.
But it led to something, and I fell in love with him, and he fell in love with me. And it was just, with everything else going on, with my dad dying and, my husband not paying attention to me. And I just felt like I needed to escape. I just needed to escape my whole life. And, one day John asked me, if I wasn't in prison, would you be with me? And I said,
Right.
I might. I don't know, but I might. And that kind of was the start of him trying to figure out how he was going to get out of prison.
Wow. Wow. So much charged emotion there. And you find that a lot. You find not all of them turn into love, but a lot of them do. And a lot of times, and of course the inmate's starving for emotion.
Yes.
And apparently at this situation you were too.
Yes, I was.
So,
and I've often said it was like pouring water on a dying plant. It just was so refreshing and so needed that I couldn't let go.
right. So in hindsight, do you truly still feel like he loved you at that time, or do you feel like it was a staged manipulation?
I do feel like he loved me. I still do
Okay.
feel that way. And I know that I did love him. And actually, I still consider him a friend. So,
Okay.
not a romantic relationship at all, but, I do hope he has a good life. And I email him on occasion, and my husband does too. I've remarried since. And in fact,
Right.
my husband and I both went and visited him in prison
Okay.
about 5 years ago. So, I try to be a friend.
Right. So I guess another question I have, and I hope this isn't a hard question, but a lot of times in prison, we don't let the volunteers know what the inmate did to get there. Did you know what he did?
I did know what he did because he told me.
Okay.
But there wasn't any kind of restriction that the prison tried to keep from me what anybody's crimes were. They were willing to tell me, but I never did want to know because I didn't want it to affect how I worked with them when they trained their dog. But since I was in there 18 months, and I was in there probably, 4 or 5 hours every day, over time I did learn what some of their crimes were.
Right. And he was in there for a carjacking that turned fatal. Now there's some discussion as to whether he pulled the trigger or the other guy did. But did that go into your mind that this guy has a violent history, or was the love overshadowing that?
Well, I felt like, and actually the prosecutor has since said that he's convinced that John didn't have the gun, that John didn't pull the trigger. So he was charged with felony murder, and he got a life sentence for felony murder.
Right.
And, to me, I kind of felt sorry for him because here he was in prison with a life sentence for murder, and he never killed anybody, and he never even had the gun. So I felt sorry for him.
Okay. Fair enough. That answers that question.
And, honestly, if he had pulled the trigger, I don't think I would have, fallen in love with him or pursued a relationship with him.
Right.
I think I would have been more wary. But the fact that I had discovered that he didn't kill anybody kind of lessened any kind of fear I might have had of his crime.
Right, right. So during this time, and I speak from personal experience here, I had a very good friend of mine. We worked together for a long time, And the institution, all the staff, started noticing that she was hanging out with this one inmate regularly, much like you were at the time. And he was her orderly, and some of us even got together and said, let's change his job. So we moved him someplace else. Well, the next quarter, she put in for a job so that she could be near him again. And I knew her and talked to her quite a bit. She was a very nice lady. And I actually went to her and I said, look, this is what people are saying. This is what people think is going on, and you're making it look that way. And it didn't stop her. She continued down that path until they found some stuff that she had brought in, and then she quit. Did you have anybody come to you at that time and say, hey, this is what this looks like, and would that have made a difference?
It would have made a difference. If someone would have stepped up and asked me, I probably would have listened to them, and I probably would have admitted. And by the way, let me just interrupt. My phone just put up a bulletin that Casey White and Vicki White have been caught.
Oh, no kidding.
Just now in Indiana, in a car chase, a high-speed car chase.
Lordy be.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up since that's a little bit what we're talking about.
No, absolutely.
But she's in the hospital.
I'd like to go into what you think about this here in a moment.
Okay.
But finish that thought about if somebody had came to you.
If someone would have come up to me and asked me, you know, I really think you're spending too much time with John Manard. I would have, you know, first of all, I would have thought about it. And at the early part of our relationship, I might have agreed with him and realized I needed to do something different. And at the later part of our relationship, if someone had confronted me, I think I would have been so afraid that I would have just quit, you know, because I didn't want to get in trouble.
Right.
So.
And that's what I try to tell people and I tell the rookies this when I've trained them. At the moment that you realize this is happening, if you will just walk into the lieutenant's office or walk into the supervisor's office and say, hey, boss, I did this, it takes all the power from the inmate.
Yes.
And I'll give you an example. All prison staff are manipulated at some level. I was sitting at my desk. I had an orderly who came in, and I was eating some Chinese food, and there was some soy sauce packets sitting there. And I tell this story quite a bit, but the inmate walked by and said, hey, boss, can I have those? I was like, yeah, I'm going to throw them away. So he takes them and leaves. No big deal in my brain. The next day he comes back through, he's getting his stuff out of the office, and he goes, hey, when next time you're going to that Chinese place, can you bring some more of those? Well, we just took a step from I'm throwing something away to he's asking me to bring something in. And what I did at that moment, I shut my door, I took him, we walked down to the lieutenant's office. I admitted that I had given him the soy sauce packets the day before and then told the lieutenant. And of course, lieutenant kicked me out and, you know, chewed on the inmate and then brought me in and chewed on me. But the moment I did that, the inmate had no more power. He couldn't manipulate me any farther. And that's what I want to teach people.
You know, there was a moment when I thought, you know, I should just go to the warden's office. This was like right before the escape. I thought I should just go to the warden's office and ask him to transfer John Manard to another prison and not give any kind of explanation. And they would have done it. But, you know, I didn't do it. But I did have that thought that I could have ended it then. And
you may not know, but do you know what it was that prevented you from doing that?
I loved him. I loved him. And you know, and I was desperate for a way out of my life too.
Right.
So it was a combination of those two things.
Fair enough. Yeah. So let's go ahead and move on. And so he started facilitating how this escape was going to happen. And you guys, did you plan this together?
It started out as a game. We did, but it kind of started out as a game. He'd go, well, I think I'm just going to escape. And I go, oh, you can't escape. People don't escape. That's ridiculous. And then he'd say, you know, I think I'm going to put myself in a box and just mail me out in the UPS shipment. And I'd say, well, that's just stupid because where would you go? And how long would you be in the box? And who would get you out? You know, And he came up with these ideas, and every one of them I was like, well, that ain't gonna work. That's a dumb idea because this and this. And then one day he said, well, I could hide in your dog van when you come to do a dog adoption. And I said, well, that idea would probably work. And then, he was off figuring out how he was going to make that work.
Right.
And then, by the time I knew I was in love with him, and I just, that's all I could think about.
Okay.
And he asked me to bring in a cell phone because he said, then I could talk to you all the time. And we wouldn't get caught because, now if we spend too much time together, we'll raise red flags here in the prison. And, over time, and when he kept asking me to do it, then finally I did bring him in a cell phone. And that's when everything went to a whole different level, because then we could talk on the phone and there wasn't any risk of getting caught. And, that's when all the planning really happened.
So at that point, did you feel like he had something more over your head because you'd actually, went from just talking about stuff to now you have actually brought in a cell phone against policy? And was that held over you?
I didn't feel like he would hold that over my head, but I felt like that was the moment when I had stepped in to be willing in this endeavor. Okay. And it was kind of when I crossed the threshold of no return, I kind of felt. Which was silly because I could have done something different at any time. But that's when I was committed, I think.
Right.
And that was only like 2 weeks before the escape. So it wasn't like there was a lot of time.
Right.
But I was crazy in love with him. And that's all I could think about. And it was just, I knew that it was a dumb idea. And I knew I was going to get in trouble. And I knew I was probably going to go to prison. But I let myself believe that they would say, oh, Toby, you shouldn't have done that. And then I would just go back and on with my life. Right. Because I wanted to believe that so that I would move forward with it.
Mm-hmm. And there is a point, usually in these manipulations, where you can just, you broke policy or something, and the discipline can stay there. And that's what I want people to, when they know that's going on, stop at that point. Yeah, you're going to get in trouble at work. Yeah. And even if you're going to get in more trouble and you get fired, it's better than going down that road.
Right. Going to prison. I mean, getting fired is better than going to prison. So
Sure. Was there any thought about you losing that dog program? I mean, since talking to you today, you were so successful at that. Was that in the back of your mind? I'm going to lose this?
Well, I knew that, of course, if we went through with the escape, that I would lose the dog program, but I hoped that it would continue. I never felt like I was in danger of losing the dog program because I felt like, if something happened and we were discovered, I felt like they would put the blame on John and move him to another prison, and maybe I would be, have more strict rules, but the program would continue.
Right. So tell me about the escape and how that worked out. And
Okay. So, so many things came together. It was just like this perfect storm. If any one of these things wouldn't have come together, it wouldn't have worked. But it was just mind-boggling how everything just lined up perfectly. So, for instance, the day of the escape was freezing cold. It was 19 degrees with a wind chill of around 0, and it was spitting snow. So nobody wanted to hang around outside. They wanted to, hurry up and get the dogs in the van and leave. Right. And the week before the escape, one of the unit teams came to me and said, Toby, you have this big wire dog crate in here. And it was a really big wire dog crate. And they said, you brought that in for this dog that had puppies, and now the puppies are born and they're adopted, and we need to get this wire crate out of here because, the inmates could use the wire to make shanks. So I want you to get this crate out of here. And John Manard happened to be standing there when the unit team said it. And he said, I have an idea. He said, that crate is almost as big as Toby. It's just huge. It would be so hard for her to carry out of the prison. So how about if I bring it down when she's picking up dogs for a dog adoption, and I could just load the crate in her van for her and she wouldn't have to carry it. And he said, that's a good idea. I'll write a note and leave it at the guard shack so that, they know that they were expecting this big dog crate.
Yeah.
So, things just started coming together. And of course, you would see somebody hiding in a dog crate. So John put a pack out box in the dog crate. And these pack out boxes, I don't know the dimensions of them. They were big, but not huge, maybe 36 inches tall. And he planned for a month or two how to fit into this box, and he just pretzeled himself in it, put a leg behind his head and another leg somewhere else, and somehow he pretzeled himself in this box, which was inside the dog crate. And I had a farm wagon inside the prison that I used to haul 50-pound bags of dog food from unit to unit. And so the plan was he would just put that dog crate on the farm wagon and bring it down and put it in the van. Well, the day of the escape, he told his cellmate and his two inmates in the cell next to him, he told them, I just got called into work and Toby's expecting this crate. So if I get it all set up on the farm wagon, will you take it down there at 10:30 when she comes for the dog adoption? And they said, sure.
Wow.
So that's how it worked.
Well, and all these escapes, it sounds like security procedures went around. And of course that always helps with this Casey White escape. I haven't worked there, but I guarantee you that there should not be any inmates going to court with a single female escort.
That's right. And they did say that's the rules there.
So the security procedures that somebody, and I know she's a boss, but if the warden walks up and says he wants to do something against policy as an officer, you've got to stand there and say, no, boss.
Yes.
There's a reason we have these policies.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and when you look back through these, they all have that in common.
Yes.
The escape at Dannemora, the one in Elmira, New York, were all security procedures is what allowed that to eventually happen. Yes, there were circumstances, but so the escape happens. You guys make it out. And how long were you? 12 days? Is that
12
right?
days, yeah. We were out for 12 days. And, I don't think that anybody can understand the total pressure and paranoia you're under during those 12 days. Because, you're looking over your shoulder. Did that person see me? Did they look at me? We're parked next to a police car. Don't look at the police car. I mean, it's just overwhelming, that pressure. And so, both after a few days, John and I both were on edge and got a little testy with each other. And, it wasn't the idyllic relationship that I'd envisioned. I mean, I was still in love with him, but I saw a side of him that I hadn't seen before inside the prison. And he probably saw a side of me he hadn't seen before either, because I was so paranoid. And that adds up, that starts wearing you down. And I think, I was probably getting close to the point where I would have walked away and done something. It was getting to the point where it was too difficult. It was just too difficult to continue. But we were stunned at the actual arrest. So we went into Chattanooga to go to an IMAX movie. So I kind of envisioned that we'd spend this whole time hiding out somewhere. But, John wanted to go and experience life because he'd been locked up since he was 17, and he just was hungry to live a life. And so we went to the movies and we went, we did different things. But we went into Chattanooga and we didn't know it, but we went into a bookstore, and we came out of the bookstore and we walked right in front of the two marshals that were heading the fugitive team that were sitting in a parked car in the parking lot because they had tracked us to Tennessee. They just weren't sure where we were. We walked right in front of them and we didn't know. And we got in the truck and we drove on up the interstate to go back to the cabin where we were staying. And they had set up this trap on the interstate. So they closed all the on-ramps, so no traffic was coming on the interstate. And when we came up over a hill, there was just a sea of police vehicles as far as you could see. I mean, all kinds. There was black and white cars and blue cars and green cars and black SWAT team SUVs, you know, just this mishmash of stuff. Like everybody in the world came out for this. And John asked me, and there was a helicopter, you know, with this bright light shining right on us. And, you know, John said, well, I might be able to outrun those police cars, but I can never outrun the helicopter. What do you want to do? And I said, well, if they ask you to pull over, I think we should pull over because, you know, that's the law. That's what we need to do. And he said, okay, that's what you want to do. That's what we'll do. And just then a police car came up alongside of us real fast and cut in front of us and slammed on their brakes, you know, wanting us to rear end them. And it made John mad. And he said, I'm not pulling over now. I'm going. So he just kept running. And he said, I'm just going to run until we run out of gas. I was just frozen. And so I went into this weird place where John was talking and I could see his lips moving, but I couldn't hear anything. And we were surrounded by police vehicles with our sirens on, and I couldn't hear them either. I was just like in this tunnel, and everything was moving like in slow motion.
Sure. Just
and
overwhelmed.
We go down the highway. Yes. We go down the highway, and the cars are boxing us in, and it's getting more difficult to go anywhere. And so John cut across the median, and this was a interstate where you couldn't see the northbound lanes from the southbound lanes. There was a median with a forest in between them. Right. And so he cut across that median and came out into the southbound lanes, and, you know, and the police followed us, and then we got pushed off the highway again, and he drove in the grass, but when he came back up on the interstate, he lost control of the truck, and we slammed across the interstate and hit head on into a tree at 100 miles an hour. Yeah.
Were you hurt?
Quite an event.
Yeah. Were you hurt?
Not anything broken, not any stitches, but I was really banged and bruised up, and I had the wind knocked out of me, and I think I probably had a concussion, but I was stunned. I was kind of out of it for a little bit. I couldn't quite figure out what was going on.
Right.
But we both walked away.
Let me ask you this, because I did one investigation and on a staff manipulation, and I set her down, and she talked to me for about 40 minutes and told me the story from the beginning to the end. And I don't think I have ever in my life seen a person who was so relieved, because this had been going on with her for 5 months. She was trapped. She couldn't figure out how to get out of it. And I think she was glad to be caught so that she could just move on. Did you feel that way?
I think if I had been caught, I probably would have felt that way.
Right.
I think I would have been relieved, but I didn't, you know, I didn't want to get caught, but I think had I been caught, I would have been probably relieved.
Right. But when this accident happened, you were taken into custody. Was there any relief or was it sadness? What were you feeling at that time?
Well, for the first couple of days, it was kind of, you know, I kind of call it, I was just muddled. I just couldn't quite figure out how I'd gotten here, what was happening. You know, nobody was very forthcoming with me about the process, about I was going to have to go to court and, you know, this was going to happen. I didn't have any idea. They didn't even put me in the regular jail. They kept me in the holding cell for 5 days, you know, and they didn't even give me a prison outfit for quite a few days. And I just didn't know what was happening. I just kind of was muddled, but I went to court on Monday. That arrest was Friday night. We went to court on Monday, and I realized I was going to go back to Kansas, which was fine with me. And, you know, the media onslaught was just unbelievable. They were like rabid dogs, you know, chasing you down the street. And I wasn't prepared for that. And that lasted, you know, for months. And it just was, it was so terrifying, really, for the media to be that, you know, intent to get you to say anything. So I started to find my way out of things. And actually, when I settled into the Leavenworth County Jail in Kansas, I kind of found a rhythm there, and it felt like I was going to be able to handle this, and I felt like I was going to be able to get through it. I did
Right.
never dreamed I'd have to serve 27 months in prison. But, I found that being locked up in the jail kind of gave me this freedom that I never had. I had no demands. I had no responsibilities. I had no duties. I could just kind of chill and figure out what I needed to do and who I was. And, I'd never had time to do that in my whole life. So it was kind of, I think I needed that. I needed that time to just be down and just, not, try to figure out and get my feet underneath me.
That's interesting. So, you mentioned Vicki White a while ago. What do you think her last couple of weeks have been like, and just what you've been able to glean from
when I first heard about it, I was sick to my stomach, and I haven't been able to hardly think of anything else. And I just keep telling my husband, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for her. I feel so bad for her. I know exactly what she's thinking, and I know exactly what she has to face. And I don't want to be in her shoes. Today, this day, yesterday, I don't want to be in her shoes. It's what she has ahead of her is so challenging and so overwhelming. And I pray that I was been praying that she'd get caught and she'd be safe, which has happened now, I understand. But I still don't stop thinking of her and wishing for her, because the really hard part is starting now.
Right.
It's a tough road. It's really a tough road to face. And it maybe will even be tougher for her because she's been a corrections officer. I don't know.
I would expect that. She probably won't have the freedom in prison that you may have had. She's going to have to be probably in a protective custody unit.
Yes, yes.
So she's going to have a harder time than most inmates would. So I find it interesting, and you spoke about the fact that John Manard was that happened when he was 17, and you're not sure that he pulled the trigger. But the guy that she ran off with, Casey White, he's also 2 counts of murder.
Yes.
If you look at the escape at Dannemora,
they were murderers as well.
They were murderers.
I know.
I wonder what the link is there. I don't know if it's...
I really think that the link is that these men who are in prison with really no chance of getting out, they've got nothing to lose. So why not take a chance on a week of freedom?
Well,
as someone who's doing a 3-year sentence, I don't think they would risk an escape because the time they get for the escape would be so much more than the time they already had to serve. But if you've got someone doing a life sentence, or you've got someone facing the death penalty, what else can you do to them if they do escape? There's not really a punishment that makes it not something you'd want to do.
And I think I read somewhere that John Manard said that the 12 days of freedom was worth it. He'd do it again.
Yes, he has said that. Yes, he has said that.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, you've taken your time in with all this, and you served your time, and I know that you are. So you've served your time, and I know that you're working on a book that's coming out soon. And
that's correct.
You've done some workbooks to help inmates. Tell me a little bit about that and your website.
Okay, so I went to, well, let me back up.
Okay.
When I went to prison, I decided I could use that 27 months to work on myself, to really dig deep and figure out who I was and what I needed to change about myself in order to really make a difference in the world. What possibilities could I have in the future, and how could I lay the groundwork to get there? And so I started doing the really hard work of going through my life and identifying all these places of trauma and start to work on healing them. And I went to a Women Starting Movements conference in Chicago about 4 years ago. And on the train on the way home, I thought, I was able to rebuild my life because I kind of knew what I needed to do to make that happen. And I was able to use my time in prison to put that into motion. But so many of the women that I met while I was in prison didn't have the experience or the life skills or the education to be able to know how to start healing themselves and move forward. So I decided I could create a workbook that was more of a personal development workbook where it walked women through discernment. I mean, discernment is huge. Most of the women in prison are there because they had no discernment and they let other people make decisions for them. I also talk about boundaries, how, you need to set boundaries to keep yourself safe. And I talk about faith and purpose and vision and gratitude, and perspective, because you have the power to change your perspective about any circumstance you're in. And just by changing your perspective, you can change your whole outlook on life. And you have that power, but you have to know what it takes to do that. So I put together a 12-week program that walked women through those types of things and gave them exercises so that they could start to figure out, who they could be, what they had the power to do, and take some steps to start, healing themselves and doing this personal development work so that they had the strength of character to move on when they got out of prison, because it's not easy to build a life when you get out of prison. It's hard to get a job. It's, society doesn't welcome you. Yep. In my case, some of my family members didn't welcome me back. And you have to be strong enough to move forward anyway and find your own path. So that's what I put into a workbook. And then I decided to expand it, and I created a second workbook that's all about thriving in a healthy community, because most women I met in prison are there because of the company they kept, and if they get out of prison and go right back to the same group of people they hung out with, they're going to be right back in prison. Yep. But we need community and we crave community. So how do you help someone find a community that's healthy when all they've ever known is a community that got them into prison? And that's what the second workbook is about. And then I put together a third workbook that's, for women who want to reach out and help others and helps them kind of put some practices in place that can let them share things with the rest of the world. So I created that series of workbooks. And all along, while I was in prison, I started writing my book, and I've been working on it for 15 years. And at first, when I wrote the book, it was the story of the escape. It was like, this is what we did. This is how it happened. But it has evolved over time. And now the book is a story of my rebuilding my life. It's a story of healing and redemption. It's a story of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and finding your own way when every road was closed to you, but, breaking you through and finding your own door. And that's what the book is now. And it's called Living with Conviction. And it's going to be released on June 15th. But it is on Amazon now for a pre-order for the ebook. And the hardback and paperback will be out there for pre-order soon. And the audiobook, everything will be released on June 15th.
Excellent. Well, I thank you. I applaud your bravery. This is a correctional officer podcast. So for you to come on here and try to help me help some of those correctional officers, or maybe volunteers, anybody working in prison, and maybe they can identify a little earlier what's going on with them and go ask for that help. Tell a friend, tell a supervisor. Just don't let it go that far.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I would advise them, if they feel like they're falling into a situation, you just need to raise your hand and tell somebody, because you're not going to get in near as much trouble as if you let it progress. So
absolutely. Well, thank you, Toby Dorr. What was your website? Did you want to give your website?
It's tobydorr.com, and that's TOBYDORR.com.
Excellent. Okay. You have a great day. We'll talk later.
Thank you so much. All right, Mike. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.